Well, we've heard all the stories that Iran could have sleeper cells all over the country. Here's what CBS News said yesterday on the Iranian nationals that were apprehended after Trump bombed their nuclear facilities.
Over the past 48 hours, ICE officials have arrested 11 Iranian nationals spanning 8 states nationwide. Among them, 5 possessed previous criminal convictions, their crimes ranging from grand larceny to drug and firearm possessions. Also among those apprehended, Ribvar Karimi. While arresting him in northern Alabama, ICE officials say they found his Islamic Republic of Iran Army identification card and allege he served as an Iranian sniper between 2018 and 2021.
For more, let's go ahead and bring in Andrew Arthur. He's a former immigration judge and a resident fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies. So, Andrew, thanks so much for coming back on the show today. Last week, we had Kyle Scheidler on, and he was telling us that members of Hezbollah were let into the U.S. because Border Patrol was so worried that they might catch COVID while they were in custody that they just let them go right on through. So just take us through how you think that some of these Iranians could have gotten into the country, and we have the situation that we're facing right now.
Sure, absolutely. It's important to note the fact that under the Biden administration, between February 2021 and November 2024, which is the last report we have, 1,750 different Iranians were apprehended entering the United States illegally. There were more than 7,000 who were stopped at the ports of entry. Those apprehensions represent a 20-fold increase over the 7-year period prior to President Biden taking office. So we saw a huge number of Iranians come to the United States. It's especially problematic because they have universal conscription in Iran that they very actively implement. So it's difficult for a military-age man to get out of the country. So you've got a whole lot of people coming in, getting caught, many of whom are within that military age cohort. Makes you wonder, how it was they got out and how it was they got here. But here's the much more important danger. At the same time that the Biden administration was releasing millions of aliens apprehended into the United States, 1.9 million others snuck by Border Patrol agents. They were overwhelmed. Don't blame the agents, to make their way into the United States. And as former Border Patrol Chief Jason Owens, then Border Patrol Chief Jason Owens, told CBS in 2024, it was those gotaways, as they're referred to, that keep him up at night. And it would have been very easy for the Iranian government to sneak hundreds, thousands of other assets into this country while the Biden administration was asleep at the switch.
You were an immigration judge, but now there's a huge fight back and forth. It seems like the federal judiciary is trying to assert itself over the immigration courts. And the way it's being reported in newspapers is that these immigrants or these deportees are being denied due process. But they seem to be skipping over the actual orders from immigration courts in the past. Have you seen that tension previously during your time on the bench? And how do you see that jurisdiction kind of unfolding over the coming months and years?
So I served under George H.W. Bush all the way through Barack Obama. Each one of those presidents was zealous about enforcing the immigration laws. So I didn't see any pushback from the federal courts. I didn't see any pushback from the administration on anything that I did. But when people talk about due process, Chris, they miss that important modifier due. Not every alien in the United States is the same. Green card holders have more rights to more process than illegal entrants do. In fact, the Supreme Court held in 2020 that aliens apprehended entering illegally have only those rights that Congress has given them, which aren't many rights at all. So it's always good to take this with a grain of salt. And remember what Thomas Jefferson said, the man who reads nothing knows more than the man who reads nothing but newspapers.
So I look at this and say, okay, we all know the Biden regime let millions upon millions of illegals into this country. Now we're trying to go through and unwind it. But how do we estimate how many people that are here that are wanting to do harm? Is there any way that we can even prioritize getting people out of this country? Because this seems like such a jumbled mess that we're in right now.
Yeah, that's the worst part, especially when you're talking about those 1,750 Iranians who were apprehended. We don't have diplomatic relations with Iran. They took over our embassy and we haven't been back since then. So consequently, we're largely reliant upon the aliens themselves to tell us whether they're good people or bad people. That's how ridiculous this vetting system is. In fact, Rodney Scott, who is now the newly confirmed commissioner of CBP, testified before the House Judiciary Committee that the vetting that we do on the vast majority of people at the border is worthless, which is why we detain them. Through the course of, being in front of immigration judges like me and, being in DHS detention, we can get a better idea on who these people are. But when you turn them around within 2 to 3 hours after they show up and simply release them into the United States, there's no way to do that robust vetting. The other thing to keep in mind when you're talking about those terrorists, those Hezbollah members, and other people who were apprehended, for the better part of 3 years, the Biden administration got hits on people, but it didn't know what to do with the classified information that it got back. And in many of those cases, it simply released those people into the United States, didn't verify whether it belonged to the individual in question, didn't really figure out who those people were. That was stopped, to Alejandro Mayorkas's credit, by a memo that he issued early in 2024. But by then, the damage had been done. The IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is the power in Iran, and they are ruthless and they are skilled. So if they wanted to move people into the United States in sleeper cells to stay here, well, one, President Obama gave them a whole lot of cash to keep those people alive, and two, the Biden border disaster facilitated their entry into this country.
So with someone like Karimi, he served in the Iranian military as a sniper, initially came here legally on a marriage visa, is married to a woman in Alabama who is heavily pregnant. As an immigration judge, how do these sorts of details, including the fact that he didn't actually change his status as is legally required to stay in the country, how do these other factors, which play heavily in the press, figure into an immigration judge's decision on whether or not someone is considered able to stay, or whether their military background with the country that we have had conflict with recently, their involvement, their family here? How do all of these factors, if at all, figure into the kind of ruling that you expect to see from an immigration court?
That's a great question, because those factors don't make him any more deportable. As I understand it, he came in on a K-1 fiancé visa, never adjusted his status. That makes him removable. So when he goes to immigration court, what he's probably going to do is he's going to apply for a green card. That's a discretionary determination. And the immigration judge can consider all of those factors: his service in the Iranian army, the potential risk that he poses to the United States, in granting or denying that application, the exercise of discretion. And the ICE attorney who represents the interests of the American people in that court will be sure to bring all of that and more up in the course of that hearing.
Well, we look at border czar Tom Homan. He went on Pod Force 1. He's going through with ICE and tracking down hundreds of thousands of children that were trafficked here in the United States. It's the worst of the worst. So how do you go through and even make a dent into what we're seeing here?
It's the same as the way that you eat the dinosaur, one spoonful at a time. But, there's nobody with a bigger appetite for such investigations than Tom Homan. Tom's been a friend of mine for years. He is dogged, he's determined, and he's skilled. He came up, through the Border Patrol ranks to be acting director of the agency and now border czar. But when you talk about those kids, what happened in real time was shameful, and the lack of attention that was paid by the majority of the national press about those kids was reprehensible. It was unacceptable. It's unforgivable. We knew, in fact, I wrote in real time that there were real problems. There were kids being released into this country who never showed up in immigration court. If they were at least before a judge like me, and I actually did have jurisdiction over a child center, I could at least, keep tabs on that child and make sure that the child was being well cared for. And I could, usher the sponsor out of the room if I needed to or had any questions. But yeah, that was just one of the many things that inspectors general at Health and Human Services, which has jurisdiction for sheltering those kids, and at DHS found that the Biden administration did wrong. And yet nothing ever changed. It wasn't until Donald Trump and Tom Homan came along and Bobby Kennedy that we really got serious about finding those kids, making sure they're safe, getting them with their families, and potentially removing them back to their families.
When I started at the Daily Caller in 2010, there were basically 3 games in town on immigration enforcement. It was Center for Immigration Studies, Senator Jeff Sessions, and one of his staffers, Stephen Miller. No one else in the GOP wanted to talk about it. No one was going on about it. A lot of the nonprofit world maybe did a little bit of things, a little bit on it, but it certainly wasn't something that they focused on. How has that landscape changed, and how have you seen the Overton window shift in American politics, being one of the originals and then being at the forefront of it since?
Yeah, Chris, it's interesting because, during those 4 years of Biden and even the last 2 years of Trump, I went up to testify before Congress and I was called every name but a child of God. I was asked what books I read and who I associated with. It was kind of ridiculous because those weren't actually the topics of the hearing. Unfortunately, a lot of the people on the outside of the immigration issue were now inside the immigration issue, but we've seen polling on this shift. In fact, I've seen it in my congressional testimony. If you look at the polls, regardless of whether it's Pew or Harvard Harris or The Economist, all of them show that immigration enforcement is Donald Trump's best policy. In fact, 80% of people in the most recent Harvard Harris poll said that they supported a plan to remove criminal aliens out of the United States. That would have been unthinkable in 2018, 2019 under Trump. And for what it's worth, it really wasn't a big deal in 2021 or 2022 under Biden. It was only when cities like New York started to feel the pinch and mayors like Eric Adams spoke up and said, this is costing us billions, something's got to change, that all of that shifted. People now, can drive down the street, or they can see it in their tax bill, or they can, take a look at their kids' classrooms, which are now overwhelmed by more than 500,000 migrant students, and see the impact. So yeah, the Overton window in this case has shifted a whole lot to the right, a whole lot in favor of Donald Trump. Speaking of Donald Trump, he really is the one that drove this. One of the best things about, having candidate Trump was he was making many of the same points that we were making. In fact, he tweeted out something or truthed out something that I wrote yesterday. I was pretty proud of that. But, he is now driving the narrative on this. And when people push, he pushes back. He doesn't stand down. And he is making people aware constantly. Trish McLaughlin, the DHS press secretary, Tom Homan, there could be no better advocate for immigration enforcement, nor one who's not going to be pushed around than Tom Homan is.
Yeah, it is a great group of people. My favorite thing about Stephen Miller, you can ask him any question and he will take it right back to immigration and give you a good answer every single time.
Even in social situations, it's unreal.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Andrew Arthur, thanks so much.